Hey everybody, this is Cave Cat once again with another video. Yeah, it's another video where I give my thoughts about an upcoming show or movie. I did it before talking about the Garfield movie and especially the Garbage Pail Kids cartoon reboot. And now I'm going to talk about another upcoming film. You'll recall in my review video talking about the Toy Story films, I expressed my frustration with the fact that Disney and Pixar decided to make a Toy Story 5, despite the fact that a lot of people didn't even want a Toy Story 4 in the first place, thinking that Toy Story 3 was a great conclusion to the series. And while I agree with a lot of people that Toy Story 4 was an unnecessary sequel in the franchise, it's still a guilty pleasure for me. However, with Toy Story 5, it feels like that the company executives are just trying to beat a dead horse. I mean, I talked about this before, but shows like Ed, Edd n Eddy and even the Fairly Odd Parents, and especially SpongeBob SquarePants, have been running for years after they first premiered. But at least in the case of Ed, Edd n Eddy and the Fairly Odd Parents, they were able to put those shows out of their misery after a long time. Though granted, Nickelodeon just had to get the bright idea to revive the Fairly Odd Parents with that Fairly Odd Parents Fairly Odder series, instead of just leaving well enough alone. Although that new Fairly Odd Parents series is a sequel to the original Fairly Odd Parents, but my thoughts on both it and the original series still stand. And don't even get me started on SpongeBob still airing longer than necessary, and especially those awful spin offs that it instigated, which are Camp Coral and The Patrick Star Show. The same thing definitely rings true with the Toy Story films here. A lot of people thought that the series ended perfectly with Toy Story 3, since it had Andy growing up and giving away his old toys before leaving for college. And yeah, they did make those short films that aired theatrically with several other Disney animated films, and especially making Toy Story of Terror and Toy Story That Time Forgot. But the decision for Disney and Pixar to make Toy Story 4 just absolutely soils it altogether. And now it feels like they're going to soil it even more by making Toy Story 5. I mean, sure, Pixar did make sequels to some of their films, like Cars, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, and of course, Toy Story. Heck, even Inside Out got a sequel, which a lot of people were surprised about because a lot of them were not expecting Inside Out to get a sequel. But now it feels like that Toy Story is going to end up as a victim of sequelitis. In case you don't know what that is, that's when a film, whether it's live action or animated, starts getting a whole bunch of sequels, even more than what is necessary. If the film does get a sequel, it will be either really good or really bad, though most of the time the sequel ends up turning out to be really bad. Take a look at what happened with the Never-Ending Story and especially Beethoven. Now, I liked Beethoven second, but I can agree with everybody else that the further Beethoven sequels were absolutely terrible. But anyway, films that did get struck with sequelitis, like The Land Before Time, The Fast and the Furious, The Godfather, Home Alone, and several others, just ended up taking away what made the original so great. Sequels can work if you actually try to expand on the story and pave the way for some world building, rather than just try to make a rehash of the original story. For example, I loved both Homeward Bound The Incredible Journey and Homeward Bound 2 Lost in San Francisco when I was younger. But as I got older, I began to realize that the second Homeward Bound film actually pales in comparison to the first one, not just because it recycled the plot of the pets getting lost during a family vacation, but also because the writing was not as good as the writing for the first film, and especially how the characterization for some of the characters, particularly Chance and Jamie, got screwed up from the first film. One of my biggest gripes with the second Homeward Bound film was the fact that while Chance now understood the importance of dogs being man's best friend, his intelligence and common sense really seemed to take a dive, and he didn't quite understand what was going on right away compared to the first film, even if a few remnants of that were also present in the first film, but not to the extent of that of the second film. Maybe this is one of the reasons why Disney didn't even bother to make a third Homeward Bound film, feeling that they would end up soiling the plot altogether and making it even more repetitive if they did try to make a third film. But back to Toy Story. It feels very ironic that Disney back in the 1990s decided not to make a third Homeward Bound film, yet here we are in the present day, and they decide to make a fifth Toy Story film after making four films, the fourth one being unnecessary enough already. This probably explains the reason why Walt Disney himself was very reluctant to make sequels to his films, believing that the story ended perfectly and that it didn't need a continuation. However, he still went ahead with making sequels to The Absent-Minded Professor and Old Yeller, which were Son of Flubber and Savage Sam respectively, and they still ended up being hits. Not to mention the fact that a lot of Disney's animated films also ended up getting sequels as well, long after Walt had passed away. A few good examples of that being The Rescuers, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, and several others. But at least those films didn't get more than two sequels that would completely stretch the story out too far. And yeah, other Disney animated films that got theatrical sequels, like The Jungle Book, Peter Pan, Planes, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Moana, and now Zootopia, were either met with hesitance and confusion or just outright frustration and outrage, mainly because they either padded out the story too much or just completely defiled the original's legacy. Although I do have to admit that Zootopia 2 actually does look pretty promising, but it still doesn't excuse the fact that Disney doesn't simply know when to leave well enough alone, especially in regards to Toy Story. At this point, we're not sure who to blame for this whole mess, if we should blame the current CEO of Disney or Hollywood themselves. Yeah, the way that Disney and Pixar decided to make Toy Story 4 and now Toy Story 5, despite Toy Story 3 ending off the story, reminds me of back in 2004 when the SpongeBob SquarePants movie was released, with Steven Hillenburg intending it to be a finale to the series. However, once the SpongeBob SquarePants movie was released, the executives decided that instead of ending off the series, they made it run a lot longer than necessary, even making a lot of absolutely terrible episodes, as well as also releasing two more movies, which were the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water and the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run, both of which received rather mixed reviews. I've got a feeling that when Nickelodeon was getting a new CEO around the time that SpongeBob first premiered, they probably picked the wrong person for the job, who just became absolutely obsessed with SpongeBob the instant he first saw it and just wanted it to keep going without end. And that obsession probably expanded to the other succeeding CEOs as well. If Nickelodeon, along with its parent company Paramount, ever do get new CEOs later on down the line, I really hope that the new CEOs for both companies actually do have the foresight and audacity to recognize that SpongeBob, as well as The Loud House, really need to end so that the company and network can make room for new shows like they did in the past. And I definitely wish the same thing for Disney and Pixar getting a new CEO who actually cares about staying true to Walt's original vision. There's also the whole debacle regarding all of the live action remakes that Disney did of a lot of their previous animated films. Of all the films that they made remakes of, they remade Pinocchio, Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Lady and the Tramp, The Jungle Book, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, and Mulan. And now they're even planning on making remakes of Lilo and Stitch and especially Moana, despite the latter having only been released back in 2016. And don't even get me started on the upcoming Snow White remake. It's like another YouTube user once said, "Come on, Disney, why reinvent the wheel? If it ain't broke, don't fix it." But anyway, Disney and Pixar is really having the same problem with having to make a fifth Toy Story, despite the public protesting against this decision. Now, I have heard some people give their theories that Toy Story 5 would involve Andy all grown up and now having his own family and going to regain his old toys from Bonnie so that his kids would enjoy them as much as he did when he was younger. While that does sound like a plausible theory, there's also a bit of a plot hole with it as well. At the end of Toy Story 4, Woody ended up abandoning Buzz and the rest of his old friends so that he could be with Bo Peep again, and especially all that garbage with Bonnie completely sidelining Woody in her playtimes, despite the fact that she really enjoyed playing with him and including him in her games back in Toy Story 3. I can definitely see why a lot of people find this little issue one of the main factors of why Toy Story 4 is a very weak installment in the Toy Story franchise. I feel that a Toy Story TV series would have been a better choice instead of making Toy Story 4. But nope, they decided to go with Toy Story 4. If they would have made a Toy Story TV series, then maybe there would have been an episode where Woody, Buzz, and the rest of Andy's old toys somehow reunite with Bo Peep, and she would have been a one-shot character in the series, kind of similar to how Gadget and the Gadgetinis, which was a spin-off to the original Inspector Gadget series, had Brain sidelined as a one-shot character. But anyway, that's just a horse of a different color. And besides, even if Toy Story 5 did decide to go with the whole Andy having a family of his own and regaining his old toys plot, how is Andy going to react when he sees that Woody is gone and that Bonnie hadn't been treating him with respect like Andy did back in his youth? I really hope that Toy Story 5 will offer an explanation and a solution to that problem once it does get released to the public. The reason I say this is because most of the time when a sequel is made to a Disney animated film, it will end up disregarding some of the pivotal plot points in the original film. A good example of this would be Lady and the Tramp. After the original film was released, Disney did a spin off comic strip focusing on Lady and Tramp's puppies, more specifically their son, Scamp. Not to mention that Scamp also got his own Disney comic stories as well, as did other characters from other Disney properties, such as Scrooge McDuck, Brer Rabbit, Gyro Gearloose, the Beagle Boys, and many others. But getting back to the example, in the original Scamp comic, Scamp had two sisters named Fluffy and Ruffy and one brother named Scooter. Being that Fluffy, Ruffy, and Scooter were all Cocker Spaniels like Lady, while Scamp looked more like Tramp. However, when Lady and the Tramp 2 Scamp's Adventure came around, the writers and producers completely disregarded these aspects of the original Scamp comic strip and turned Scooter into a female, as well as renaming Scamp's sisters to Annette, Colette, and Danielle. It's like the writers either never read the original Scamp comic strip or they read it but just decided to completely rewrite some aspects of it altogether to make it more believable to modern audiences. And I fear that the same thing will happen when Toy Story 5 is released. Well, with all that's been said, those are the reasons why I think that Toy Story 5 will not work, even if it does get released at theaters. As I mentioned before, Disney really needs a new CEO who actually does care about keeping true to what Walt himself wanted in the first place, much like Michael Eisner did when he used to be the CEO for Disney back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Hopefully, they'll get a more competent CEO sometime in the future after Bob Iger steps down from the position. Anyway, that about does it for me for now. Once more, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel for more videos from me. So until next time, later!